Welcome to this second session of the second day of the Better Learning Leadership Conference. We had a great day yesterday and we're looking forward to another great day today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ben Knight. I'm the Director for Language Research at Cambridge University Press, and I'm going to be your host today for today's session with Professor Jaideep Prabhu. Before I introduce the session, just a few admin points. If you've got a question for Jaideep, better to put it in the QA box rather than the chat box, and we'll try and answer those when we can. The PowerPoint slides won't be shared, but we are recording the session, which you can access later. The recording won't include the breakout room discussions because it's going to be a more interactive session. If you RSVP to the invite for this event, you'll be sent an email after the event, which contains a certificate of attendance plus links to session recordings. So without any more ado, I'm very pleased to introduce and to welcome Professor Jaideep Prabhu, who will be talking to us today about a topic which he is an international thought leader on, and that is frugal innovation, how to do better with less. Jaideep is Professor of Marketing, Jawaharlal Nehru Professor of Indian Business and Enterprise, and Director of the Center for India and Global Business at the Judge Business School, University of Cambridge. His research interests are marketing, innovation strategy, and international business. And we're really lucky to have him today as one of our speakers. Passing over to you, Jaideep.
Thank you so much, Ben. And hello, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be with you today to talk about, as Ben said, frugal innovation, particularly in the context of education. So it's wonderful to be with you. And I will now share my screen. We will go through a few ideas together for say about 10 or 15 minutes. And then I have a brief exercise for you to apply some of these ideas in a group. So I will put you into breakout groups in about 15 minutes. We will have a group discussion in our breakout groups for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for a 10-minute discussion before the session ends. So let me share my screen, and I will start with my presentation of what we're going to talk about. So I hope you can all see my screen. If you can just put thumbs up, perfect, wonderful. So what are we going to talk about for about 15 minutes? First, we'll just briefly talk about what's innovation, a definition that we can all agree on. Then we look a little bit at, do we really need to innovate in education or in any sphere? Why? And if so, in what areas do we need to innovate? Then we'll look at who does this innovation? Who should be involved in this process? And how should we do it? We'll look at a very simple kind of framework, shall we say, a process for innovating. And at the end of this session, I'll briefly talk about how each of you can create a culture of innovation in the organizations where you work. So that's the agenda for today. And let's get started. Let's get stuck right in with what is innovation. So here are three very sort of simple definitions that I quite like and I often use when I think about innovation. First, that it is solving some kind of problem creatively. So thinking of some kind of new solution to a problem. Another way to think about it, and this is the link with frugal, is how can you do something better or how can you do more of something, but with less resource? And that's where the ingenuity comes in. How can you do more with less? So it's all about using our gray matter here, our inner resources, to substitute for external resources that we may not have to make things better for the people we care about. So hopefully you all agree with that, with those definitions. Now, do we really need to innovate? It's a bit of a buzzword, and a lot of people use this term now, and maybe it's overused as well. But it's worth stepping back and asking ourselves, do we need to bring in new ways of doing things, and why? And I often do these sessions with head teachers from around the world, including from India, my native country. We have a very interesting program that we run at the Judge Business School with the education faculty in Cambridge for head teachers from Indian state schools. And I asked them this question, I asked them, do you need to innovate? And they all vigorously shake their heads and say, yes, absolutely. Or they nod rather and say, we have to do this. Why? I asked them why. And they say, well, there's a pressure to change. We have to keep up with changes in society, demands from parents, demands from the government, demands from society, and of course, technology changes. So there are pressures on us to do more and to do better, but often we don't have the resources. We have to make do with the limited resources we have. And of course, there's also pressures of time. We don't have enormous time. And on the positive side, they often say it's not just about these negative pressures. There are also opportunities for us to make lives better for the students, for parents, for our teachers, and so on. We can use new ways of doing things to make life better for everyone. So that would be my argument too. This is what teachers have told me. Now, let me skip on to talking about how can you innovate? What are the different ways in which you can innovate? And this is not just for education. This can be in any sector. There are typically three ways you can do new things. One is you can come up with new products or services for your customers. The second is you can come up with new processes, new ways of doing things, new ways of developing products and services, delivering them, managing your organization, and so on. And third is you come up with a new business model, and that's an entirely new way of doing that business. Let me give you some examples in the context of education. And I'll start with product or service innovation. There are several ways in which you can innovate with products or services in education. First, you can introduce new fields. So I teach in a business school in Cambridge. Cambridge is an 800-year-old university. Business was only introduced as a field maybe about 30 years ago. So you can always come up with new fields or topics in education. Within our business school, we have introduced recently a new topic of social innovation. How do you innovate in social areas such as education? You can innovate by coming up with new formats or degrees. So this topic of social innovation is delivered through a Master of Studies, which is a new degree that the University of Cambridge has introduced, which is for people who are working and cannot come and live in Cambridge for a whole year. They're busy in their parts of the world. They can only come for a few weeks. So they come for a couple of weeks every 6 months, and the rest of their education happens online. We now have MicroMasters, which are very short programs, often delivered online for a kind of certificate, if not a degree. And of course, you have new platforms, digital platforms to deliver courses, such as edX. This is an example of a product innovation in education from one of our former students. He was a mature student, Eben Upton, this is him. He was doing a part-time MBA with us while he was teaching in the computer science department here in Cambridge. And he and his colleagues had noticed that fewer and fewer young people were applying to study computer science, not only in Cambridge, but in the UK. And even the ones who had applied had never tinkered with a computer, with the hardware, and they had never done any coding. So he and his colleagues came up with this basic computer, the microprocessor he's holding in his hand. And he said, it would be so basic, they would have to play with the hardware and they would have to code. And it would be so cheap that if they broke it, it wouldn't be a problem. So they came up with this first one, which was about $30. And then now they have a $5 version. And they've sold millions of these, not only to kids, but also to their parents. So another example of a product innovation in education. Another student of mine, he took that Raspberry Pi, that basic computer, he gave it a cladding, and he branded it CoLearnr, and he loaded it with something called the Khan Academy. The Khan Academy is the entire US school curriculum available in video form on YouTube for free. But he said there are lots of children around the world, they don't have access to the internet. They may not have access to a PC, but they have usually TVs in their schools. So they could connect this device to a TV and they would have access to all this content. So those are product or service innovations in education. What about process innovations? How you deliver your courses? Well, we have new technologies like LMSs or BLEs, which are a new way for students and professors to interact, usually online. We have new uses for computers. So we have computer-based exams and grading. And now we even have artificial intelligence to help us grade exams in large numbers. We have new approaches to learning, like peer-to-peer learning, project-based learning, interactive learning, and so on. Now, what about business model innovation? So this is where you rethink the whole way a business is designed and delivered. And in education, we've seen many such business model innovations over time. So for instance, in the UK, for many years, we've had the Open University, which is like an off-campus business model. In the US, this is possibly the world's largest university, the University of Phoenix. It's entirely online, digital, no physical campus. And of course, increasingly, we have mixed on and off campus, face-to-face or in-person and online models. So we're seeing a lot of business model innovation in education as well. Now, who innovates? Well, I think, and I would argue, and again, this is what often head teachers from around the world tell me, you can get anyone and everyone to help you with innovation. Obviously, teachers and staff in an educational institution may be the key innovators, but students can also be part of this. Parents can help, and the community as a whole can also be involved. So now I want to briefly introduce you to this approach to innovation, which you will then apply in groups in a little while to a problem that you choose. But this is one way that's often used in education to innovate. And basically what you do is you start by feeling the problem. That's the first step. You have to empathize with the people who are facing the problem. You have to put yourself in their place and try and understand what the problem really is. Then you imagine a solution. After you've understood the problem, you imagine what a solution might look like. You test the solution, you improve it, and then you share it with others. So I want you to keep this in mind, this feel, imagine, try, improve, and share, because you're going to try and apply this approach in a second. And now I will put you into breakout groups. We have about 60 people here. So I'm going to make about, let's say, I'll make about 12, 13 groups. So we roughly have 4 to 5 people in the groups. And I want you in your groups to, for about 15 minutes, think about how you would apply this approach to a problem that you are facing in your institution. You can decide what that's going to be. I'm sure all of you are intuitively doing this in your schools or in your organizations. Intuitively, obviously, you have problems, you know those problems because you face them, and you do this. You feel the problem, you imagine solutions, you try the solutions. Now, can you do this systematically and engage others? So here is a process that I suggest and offer up to you, where you can systematically do this, perhaps on an annual cycle in your institutions, where together as a community, not just the teachers and the staff, but also the students, maybe you can involve parents as well. You might have like a day or even a couple of hours where people meet to come up with, to brainstorm problems that people are facing. So you generate a list of problems in a kind of brainstorming way. But then, of course, you can't address all these problems. You then have to prioritize a few. Having generated a list of problems, identify a few that you will focus on maybe over that term or the year, maybe 2 or 3 big problems that are shared. Then you go into another cycle of brainstorming, generate solutions, generate ideas in a kind of brainstorming way, in a divergent way, if you will. And then when you've generated many ideas, obviously you can't implement all of them, you then choose a few, become critical and converge on a few solutions to each of these problems you've chosen. Then, of course, you have to implement them and continuously learn. See how, and you can involve the students in the implementation, like that stationary example I gave you. And then, of course, once you've learned, you can share it with others. So that's one way you might be able to create a culture of innovation in your institutions, where you're actually empowering everyone, giving them the space and the means to solve their own problems, not to leave it up to the head teacher or the class teacher to solve the problems. The key thing is to partner with others in solving these problems. Could be others in the community, could be institutions in the neighborhood, the government or companies. Encourage experiments. Let people try out experiments in their classrooms. Maybe there'll be something that'll go wrong, but if it's an experiment, the costs aren't really high. The point is to continuously learn, to be constantly trying out new things, seeing what works, and then ditching the things that don't work, but keeping the things that do work. And of course, sharing, not only within your school, but other schools. You can learn so much from each other. So I'll just end on this note. Your role as leaders of innovation is multifold. You have to be visionaries, not just dealing with the current situation. You have to think about the future, issues that are going to come up in the future, both opportunities and challenges. You have to be risk takers, willing to experiment, try things that might be a bit risky and might fail, but nevertheless worth trying. You can't do this alone. You have to take other people with you. You have to build these networks and communities within your school and outside your school. And you have to champion new ideas. You have to support people with new ideas, and you have to enable them to flourish. So on that note, I will stop this session. I want to thank you all for participating. I know it's been all too brief. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas and thoughts with us. Good luck in your wonderful work, and do stay in touch. Back to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Jaideep. That was a wonderful session, really inspiring, lots of great ideas. And I think particularly in the breakout rooms, talking to other people here, that was particularly energizing in hearing other people and their ideas and the things that they want to solve. So thank you so much for this really handy kind of introduction to the idea of frugal innovation. We're going to have to move on. We've got to prepare for the next session at 10. So thank you again, Jaideep. Thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for joining.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.